Good afternoon and welcome to the pre-conference webinar series organized as part of eCampus Ontario's 8th Annual Micro-Credential Forum. My name is Michael Krobach and I'll be your host for today. Please note that this session is being recorded and will be published online via our YouTube channel for asynchronous viewing later this spring. The Micro-Credential Forum is Canada's premier micro-credential summit, and we're so delighted that you've chosen to spend your time with us today. This afternoon's webinars are the start of an exciting lineup of programming we have throughout the month of February. Our conference will continue on February 27th and 28th, with options to participate both in person at the Toronto Reference Library and virtually via Zoom. Tickets are going quickly, and registration remains open until Tuesday. For more information, please visit our website, which we'll share in the chat. I'd like to begin today's webinar with a land acknowledgement. I'm hosting this session from my home in Toronto. As a settler of Polish, Austrian, and Croatian descent, I'm grateful to have the privilege to learn and live on this traditional territory. I recognize this is a virtual space, and so you may be joining us from different lands. If you are a settler, I encourage you to take some time out of your day to reflect on the land you're on and your relationship to traditional lands. We invite you to use the chat window to share where you're joining us from. As you may know, eCampus Ontario is a not-for-profit membership-based organization funded by the Ontario Ministry of Colleges and Universities. We convene the entirety of the public post-secondary education sector, representing all publicly assisted universities, colleges, and Indigenous institutes in the province. We work to build digital by design educator, learner, and employer-centric experiences. We play a critical role in championing and advancing digital participation in post-secondary education, helping grow the economy and sustain the sector by connecting Ontario's post-secondary institutions and students to the future of learning and the future of work. We lead in the research, development, and sharing of exemplary practices in online and other forms of tech-enabled learning, supporting institutions and employers in fostering innovation, collaboration, and excellence on behalf of Ontario's students and faculty. Our Micro-Credential Forum is one of our 3 annual flagship events. I'm very pleased to introduce Dr. Lauren Kennedy-Barrows, who will share her research on designing micro-credentials for adult learners, insights into priorities and preferences. Lauren earned her doctorate in international education and policy from the University of Toronto, where her research focused on micro-credentials and the evolving landscape of continuing education in post-secondary institutions. She's currently the manager of the English Language Institute at the University of Lethbridge, where she leads a team of instructors and oversees language programs for international students and professionals. Prior to joining the University of Lethbridge, Lauren worked in the high-stakes language testing industry, contributing to major domestic and international testing organizations and working with branches of the US and Canadian governments. Please join me in welcoming Lauren, and I'll turn things over to you, Lauren.
Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate that. So I'm going to share up my slides here, and then we can get started. There we go. All right, so good afternoon or good morning, everyone. My name is Lauren Kennedy-Barrows, and I am joining you today from an extremely cold but less snowy Lethbridge, Alberta, here at the University of Lethbridge. And I am absolutely delighted to be able to present to you some of my research, which was completed as part of my doctorate on micro-credentials about designing programs for our learners. And so when I started doing this particular research, which was about 4 or 5 years ago, one of the things that was very apparent to me was that there is not a lot of academic or scholarly research into this space, but there is a lot of people who are doing excellent work in this space. And so part of the research that I wanted to contribute was to add in some empirical evidence about what these things are that learners are excited about, that governments are putting money towards, and that we within our institutions and whether they be colleges, polytechnics, or colleges, universities, are creating for our learners. So by virtue of the fact that you have signed up for this webinar, I'm going to assume that you have at least some understanding of what a micro-credential is. And for the purposes of this presentation, what I'm talking about as a micro-credential is something that is a small focused certification that's used for acquiring specific skills or knowledge. And they're used by learners to gain skills for their workplace, prerequisites potentially for further education, or just even for personal reasons that they're looking to be able to further their own development, their own knowledge, their own personal reasons. It's generally considered less than a full degree or diploma. And within the entire space in which we work, they're ones that can be delivered by post-secondary institutions, professional organizations, industry associations, or commercial entities. But for the purposes of this particular presentation, I'm going to really focus on the post-secondary institutions and definitely those within Canada. And in preparing my slides for today, a few weeks ago, I was at a conference and some of the speakers had started their presentations with a dictionary definition of the topic they were talking about. It was a student conference. And as I sort of sat there and was amazed that these students had the gumption to get up and talk to an entire audience of people, I reflected on the fact that they were able to actually give some sort of a dictionary definition of their topic was something that I can't do when I'm starting to talk about micro-credentials to audiences. And the reason for that is, we certainly have frameworks, we have standards, we have different types of definitions that come out from a variety of different organizations, including eCampus Ontario, as to what these types of things are. But by design and on purpose, they are relatively open so that we can create different types of programs to suit different types of learners, different types of needs, different types of topics, different types of modes of learning. And so that is really what I wanted to sort of focus on is, well, if we as a organization and the people who are providing these particular micro-credentials and developing these types of programs to learners are going to be presenting, we also want to know, well, what is it that learners are looking to actually gain? And so across the country right now, we do know that about 30 to 50% of adults annually participate in some form of learning that does not lead to a post-secondary degree or diploma. And also 83% of the publicly funded post-secondary institutions offered or have plans to offer micro-credentials. There's also, across the country at this point, at least 4 provinces that have published guides or frameworks that define what these particular things are. We also have governments, provincial governments, who are supporting these with funding, so that within BC, you see that these days there's over 130 micro-credentials. Alberta, whereas I am located, has made several $1 million of investments. And Ontario is truly at the forefront, at least nationally, but here within Canada, in terms of the amount of public funds as well as policies and programs in support of micro-credentials at the post-secondary level. For example, the ability to get student aid for micro-credential programs at a variety of different recognized institutions. And so within this landscape, these particular qualifications exist. They are being offered now, they are in development. But the scholarly research behind it hasn't necessarily caught up at the same level. It is exceptionally sparse, and while there have absolutely internationally, thinking to the EU, thinking to Australia, thinking to the United States and New Zealand, there is work that is being done, but it is still relatively small and in its infancy. One of the things that is also characteristic of the research that has been done is that it is relatively top-down. It's academics and scholars thinking this is a really good idea, and it is. Where there has been an absence or a lack of information is, well, what is it that the learners are looking for in these particular credentials. And we know that they would be able to meet some learners' lifelong and life-wide learning needs. And we also know that it is one of the things that post-secondary institutions do well, which is to provide that knowledge, provide those skills, provide those abilities to learners through existing types of courses, existing types of credentials, and existing type of work. But what is it that is going to make a person who is looking for additional training, additional qualifications, really latch on to a particular program that is being offered and say, yes, I actually want to do this? And so one of the things that I wanted to do within my research is to ask these questions, which is, what are Canadians' preferences for attributes related to micro-credential programs delivered by post-secondary institutions, as well as to look at the different types of the subgroups of people and to see if there's any commonalities, what in terms of maybe age or in terms of gender, this type of a thing. And so I focused on 7 different program attributes when it comes to a micro-credential program. And these are the things that is topic agnostic. So we think about the format of instruction. We think about the time commitment, total hours of work, provider reputation, external connections, whether there's reimbursement, and the particular cost. And these are things that when you are designing a particular micro-credential program, regardless of the actual topic, you need to consider. And so in coming to think about these different types of 7 program attributes, which is, what does this program look like? I needed to come up with a method that would, in fact, let me investigate, what do people prefer? What is it that is going to be important to them when it comes to these different types of 7 program attributes? And the methodology that I chose for this particular research is what's known as a discrete choice experiment. And a discrete choice experiment, what it does is it emulates real-world decision-making by presenting a program attributes together as in a package instead of one at a time. And so if you think about a micro-credential program, that just in terms of the time, the cost, the institution that you're taking it, certainly there are different types of trade-offs and choices that you might make when you are selecting between institution A versus institution B. You're thinking about program type A or program type B. And this particular method identifies to what extent the different attributes and level affect somebody's choices, affect their preferences, what determines what is important to them when they are making that choice to click, yes, I want to enroll in this particular program. This particular method is often used in economics and healthcare product marketing studies. And if you have a business background, you might also know this as a choice-based conjoint study. It's exactly same thing, different types of words for the study type. And it is based on the economic concept of random utility theory. Now, understanding that this particular webinar is comprised of researchers and practitioners and people who are just sort of interested in this, I did a quantitative study, and I promise you that I am going to keep the math to a minimum and focus the rest of the presentation more on the results as well as the implications for practice. That being said, this is a particular method that if you would like to have some further discussion in the Q&A afterwards, I'm happy to talk more in detail about that. And so when you're doing a discrete choice experiment, you have to start with a question. And that particular question that I asked was, a post-secondary institution is offering a micro-credential program on a topic of great interest to you. And to then the participants needed to select the version of the micro-credential program you prefer. And so what appeared to the participants on the screen was a choice between 2 particular different types of programs. There was 4 different attributes: format of instruction, total hours of work to complete the program, provide a reputation. So I had 7, but only 4 showed up at one time. And then you needed to take a look at these and say, which one would you potentially like? Would you want to have a blended program? Would you want an online program? If it's online, well, it's going to be longer hours, but is from a provider with an excellent reputation. The connections for the employers and to other graduates, however, there weren't any. So that's that program B on the right-hand side of your screen. Whereas on the left-hand side, that connection for program graduates was that employers recruited program graduates. There was also another option, and then I had a secondary question after this. So after you've sort of made this choice in terms of what is it that you actually preferred, you then had to go in and ask a second question, answer a second question, which was, would you really enroll in the program that you chose above? And the reason I wanted to ask this none question is because while people will absolutely have preferences in terms of wanting to have, say, online learning versus a program that would have connections to an employer or an industry in which it was recognized, that decision as to whether you would actually enroll in one program versus another program could also potentially be constrained by your financial situation, your family situation, your work situation. Is it really actually of benefit, of utility, of usefulness to you? And so that's why there's that secondary question of, would you really enroll in the program you chose above? Okay. And so what I had looked at overall was these particular 7 types of attributes. So as I mentioned, format of instruction, total hours of work, time commitment, provider reputation, external connections, reimbursement, and cost. And then I had different types of levels that were varied. Okay. And where I got these 7 different attributes and these various levels was by examining what current micro-credentials are offered across Canada and which are actually possible. And so by taking a look, for example, at the various frameworks, the various standards, the various course offerings that are currently available at colleges, universities, polytechnics, and institutes, this represents more or less the different types of options that a program planner, a content developer could potentially consider. Because I was focusing very much on the post-secondary institutions, for provider reputation, it went from fair to excellent, and cost went anywhere from $500 for a course all the way up to $4,000. And I appreciate that in some of your programs that are not looking at $4,000, but I'll tell you there's one program in BC that is based on a chemistry, and it is in fact $4,000. Some are also free, and whether it is free to the learner or whether it is because it is through reimbursement from an employer, that was also important for me to include. So some of these micro-credentials, there might not be any kind of a reimbursement. There might be partial reimbursement, or maybe the entire full cost is subsidized in some way, shape, or form. So these were the situation, the environment in which I conducted the study. And so I showed you one of those tasks earlier, and I created 300 versions of the particular survey instrument. Each person answered 11 tasks. Through the help of a data collection national survey firm, I sent out the survey to over 1,200 participants who were between 24 to 64 years of age, that they had a high school diploma, were able to read English, and resided in Canada. And I conducted the survey about this time last year, so the data is extremely current. And after doing all of my data cleaning, I had a usable responses of about 1,000 participants and all of their data. I also had a socio-demographic questionnaire at the end of the survey as well, just to get some information about gender, employment status, income, and these types of things. And the analysis that I did that I'm going to talk about today was a hierarchical Bayesian estimation analysis, as well as some latent class analysis. All right, so what is it that I actually found? Now, first of all, my sample was highly comparable to the target market for micro-credentials in terms of age, gender, whether someone was born in Canada or not, their ethnic identity, province of residence, income, and education. With micro-credentials, we're generally wanting to target people who have already sort of passed that very initial entry after high school of opportunity for post-secondary education and that undergraduate degree, that college diploma. So remember that my sample started with people who were at age 24. And so that is, and I was pretty darn close with my 1,000 people of getting a comparable target market. And one of the questions that I asked of these people is, had you ever heard of micro-credentials before? And which was awesome, because 31.4% of people in my study had in fact heard and had some prior familiarity with micro-credentials. To me, that's huge. These are not people who are working in higher education. These are not people who are in HR. This is the general adult Canadian population between 24 to 64 years of age who have a high school degree and have somehow heard about micro-credentials either through the work that your marketing departments have done, through work that the governments have done in terms of promoting these, through their own research, their own needs. That's actually a pretty high number when you think about who has actually had some prior familiarity with what it is that we work with on a daily basis. And so the first type of an analysis that I did was what's called a hierarchical Bayesian estimation. And the key results that you can get out of this is, what are the importance of those 7 attributes to a person's preference, as well as the levels that are preferred. And it examines it at the aggregate level, and it's also possible to look at it at the subgroup level. When I say aggregate, that just means average. So I'm just looking at sort of everyone put together. And what I found is, remembering those 7, what are the most important? So when somebody is thinking, what is it that I am considering about a micro-credential program that is important to me, that's going to make me click on the, I want to do this, I'm going to enroll. The first thing that they really are considering is cost. Cost is important. Cost is going to potentially drive that decision in terms of, am I going to bother doing this? Is it financially make sense for me to do this? The second most important, and this was to me actually one of the most interesting findings, was provider reputation. And this is the reputation of your institution. This is the reputation of your program. This is, how do people perceive your standing within the community relative to other types of institutions. The third most important was external connections. And this was that idea as to, if someone takes your micro-credential, are they going to be able to use it to get advanced standing in another program? Is it going to be recognized by employers? In other words, that idea of whether employers would potentially recruit program graduates, or is there no connection? And then the fourth most important was the format of instruction. And that was that idea of whether it was online, in person, or blended. So these 4 particular attributes are what is over 2/3 of going into someone's decision as to whether they are actually going to choose your program. Now, the availability of reimbursement, the total hours of work it might take someone to complete a micro-credential, as well as the time commitment involved, they were important too, but to a much lesser extent than those top 4 attributes: the cost, provider reputation, external connection, as well as format of instruction. But then I can also, with this particular type of analyses, actually take a look at those levels and see whether any of them are more preferred or less preferred. And so what was that particular most preferred thing? And so in terms of format of instruction, most people preferred things to be online. Total hours of work, they wanted a shorter type of a program that they could complete part-time. They wanted a provider that had an excellent reputation, and they wanted that employers to be able to recruit program graduates. They preferred full reimbursement as well as lower cost. And this is actually relatively intuitively understandable in that we can understand, yes, people want things that are cheaper, faster, better. And the least type of preferred micro-credential format would be the converse. So they had less of a preference for in-person instruction, a longer program, one that was full-time, as well as one that was, say, higher cost with no reimbursement. But the interesting thing is that behind these, and so here's a summary on this particular table. And so you can sort of see is that, okay, if I'm going to create a particular type of program, what I want to do is to try to have this idea as to what are the most preferred types of characteristics of a program and maximize these versus and try to minimize the least type of preferred micro-credential. Now, looking at the least preferred, you might say, well, who is going to actually go ahead and put together a program that costs $4,000, that has 241 hours of, classroom instruction that has to be done full time? And I'm currently the manager of a English language program here at the University of Lethbridge. And let me tell you that the characteristics, the attributes of my particular program resemble this quite a lot. So they do exist. Based on this research, we are making, by the way, some changes here at the U of L to try to think about how can we reorganize the English language program to have some more of those attributes and levels that are more preferred. Because for adult learners, they have constraints, and whether it be family, work, that don't allow them necessarily to participate in these types of longer programs. And behind all of these understanding of what is the most preferred attributes and what are the most preferred levels is I actually have these numerical types of utilities, is the technical term for it, that I can then plug into a simulation. And so if we have our most preferred micro-credential program that is available within that marketplace, and we put it head to head with the least preferred micro-credential program, and we also give people an option not to choose anything, well, what is the share of preference? How many people are actually going to pick that most preferred program versus that least preferred program? And what I find is that if you have that most preferred program, you're going to get 73.8% of the people to say, yes, I'm actually going to enroll in this. Whereas only 7.7%, less than 1% would pick that least preferred program, and 25% would say, you know what? I kind of like my status quo. I'm not going to enroll in either of those particular programs. And so this is really cool in terms of being able to have some understanding of, well, what does the different types of combinations of levels of attributes, can you sort of guesstimate what is the uptake going to be? What is the preferred type of program design? But this is at the aggregate. This is sort of looking at that whole population as like those 1,000 people, they had the same kind of preferences. And we know that people have different types of preferences. And my second question that I really wanted to get at and to understand was, well, what kind of groups explain or don't explain these particular types of findings? And so the next thing that I did was to take a look and to see, well, okay, could I find any patterns based on people's age, gender, education level, their ethnicity, and whether they were born in Canada? And the answer was no. It was not based on those socio-demographic types of categories in terms of there was an absolute, statistically significant type of a data point that I could sort of say is like, yes, all 24-year-olds to 35-year-olds prefer this. it was based on something else. And so what it was based on was patterns of micro-credential program preferences. And so the second type of analysis that I did was something that's called a latent class analysis. And what a latent class analysis does is it looks at all of the different types of selections that people had made, and it groups people together based on their preferences. And the optimal solution that the data produced was that there are 4 distinct groups of micro-credential of Canadians who are when they were looking for a micro-credential program that they fall into. And these particular 4 groups share the same kind of characteristics in the kind of programs that they are looking for. And those 4 programs or 4 groups, as I named, knowledge seekers, convenience learners, online opposers, and the disinclined and skeptical. And so the largest particular group was the convenience learners, which was about 30% of the population. And knowledge seekers were also there as well. So let me tell you a little bit, let's look at sort of what these particular groups have and what was important to them, because they really do not necessarily follow that whole average. So our knowledge seekers, which are about 22% of the population, these are the folks who are most likely to enroll in a micro-credential. The thing that is most important to them is the reputation of the provider, as well as the connections with the employer. So they're really looking to find a micro-credential that would lead them to have some sort of a benefit in terms of future employment prospects, whether employers recruit program graduates. They were less concerned about how long it would take, as well as whether the program would be offered as a part-time program, a flexible program, or a full-time program. The largest group were somewhat similar to those knowledge seekers, but these were the people who would enroll if it worked with the rest of their lives, in terms of if it fit into their existing employment obligations and family obligations. They had a high preference for online learning, but they also wanted a provider that had a excellent reputation or a good reputation, and cost wasn't a very important consideration to them. These 2 groups, the knowledge seekers and the convenience learners, which is about 50-ish% of the population, are those that are most likely to enroll in your micro-credential programs. But there's 2 other groups. And those 2 other groups also have some really interesting characteristics. The first one would be our online opposers. And these are the people who, if you offered a micro-credential that is online, are more likely just to say online, no, thank you. They really want to have that in-person learning experience, and they are fine with it being on a part-time. Because they are seeking something that is in-person and part-time, the connections to an employer, or whether they get an advanced standing in a future program, such as a graduate degree or another diploma or qualification, was less important to them. And that actually represented about 17%. So it was my smallest group, but certainly very sizable. And then the final group, which was about 29%, was the disinclined and skeptical. And this was when you put those 2 programs together head-to-head in my survey and asked that secondary question of, would you really enroll in this program? They were the ones that said, nope. Even if it had their preferred characteristics, they almost certainly were just going to be like, this is just not for me. I don't need to have this in my, to spend my time doing this. The cost isn't worth it. I'm not going to bother. They really did prefer to just continue with their thing. And that's okay, because, we have intuitively understand we can't please everybody all of the time. And so the size of this group being 30% is about what I would expect in terms of if you're looking at that general population. And so once I had found these particular groups, I went in and sort of said, okay, so who are the people who are within the knowledge seeker group, the convenience learners, the online opposers, and the disinclined and skeptical? And so what I saw is that the knowledge seekers tend to be people who are between 35 to 44 years of age. They already had a post-secondary degree or diploma, and they were earning less than $100,000 per year. The convenience learners also very similarly were in that age bracket of 35 to 44 years of age, although more of them were female. They also predominantly had a post-secondary degree or diploma, and were also learning less than $100,000 per year. These convenience learners, however, most of them were already working in a full-time basis for a job for an employer, or in their own small business that was considered full-time employment. Interestingly, the online opposers were the youngest age group. Most of them were between 24 to 34 years of age. And I've thought to myself, it's like, I was really surprised. I honestly thought that that online opposer group might be those who are in the older category, but they're not. They're the people who are 24 to 34. They're, those early adults. People who may have had experiences going to high school or going to university and college online during COVID. The majority of those folks were also male and actually had a postgraduate degree. So they were extremely well educated, as well as earning more than $100,000 per year. They also had the most familiarity with micro-credentials before beginning this particular study compared to the other groups. And so this particular group of online opposers, while they, have presumably a lot of education, what they're looking for in that micro-credential experience is to have that online or that in-person experience where they can network, where they can have that in-person interaction with somebody. That disinclined and skeptical group was tending to be within that older age group of 55 to 64 years of age. They were earning less than $100,000, and they were generally less familiar with micro-credentials before beginning this particular study. It's possible that with some additional education that the number of folks who are unfamiliar with micro-credentials within this disinclined and skeptical group could move into the online opposers or convenience learners or knowledge seeker group. But right now, this is sort of where they fell. What was interesting and not statistically significant within these particular groups was whether somebody was white or not white, or whether their place of birth in terms of being in Canada or outside of Canada, it didn't matter. So if you remember back when I showed you sort of if we had that most preferred micro-credential program head-to-head with the least preferred micro-credential program, now knowing what these particular four groups are, I can do something similar with a different type of a simulation. And so what that particularly looks like, and so let's say we have three different programs. And so who are going to offer a micro-credential that's particularly interesting to somebody. And provider one decides to offer it online. Provider two decides to do a blended program, and provider three is going to be online. Total hours of work are with lower than 50 hours, but they vary. The time commitment is going to slightly change. The reputation varies from excellent to good. Connections to employers and other programs is different between none to employers recruit, advanced placement, whether there's reimbursement available. And then the cost is either $1,000, $2,000, or $1,000. So to yourselves, and you can put this in the chat if you choose to, is just knowing what you know about what I have just presented. Which particular provider do you think will have the most shares of preference? Which will be most preferred by groups of people? If someone was given this choice, would they choose provider one, provider two, provider three? And you can go ahead and put that into the chat and just think about this on your own self. So interestingly, most people, 35.5%, would actually not choose any of them. But the second most popular program was the second, so provider two. gained the most shares of preference for a micro-credential with these particular attributes, with these particular levels and characteristics. About 30%, 30.5% on average. Now let's take a look at our particular groups, because we realize that there are those 4 different categories of learners. So this is at the average. When it comes down to our knowledge seekers and our convenience learners, the vast majority of them are going to pick that second provider. 27.8% had that preference for that micro-credential that had the characteristics from provider 2, and the convenience learners wanted that 34.1%. It hit all of the right buttons for them, that they were much more willing to enroll in that particular program. Now let's look at our disinclined and skeptical. That's where that huge number of people who were going to say, no, I'm not going to do it came from. That 87.6, they were like, no, I'm not going to pick anything. The online opposers, 32.7 would also pick none, because if you recall, none of these were a completely in-person program. Only provider 2, which had a blended program, had was going to be the most attractive to them, because that's what was important. That's what they were looking for. And so if you think about how are we going to be able to sort of put these particular programs together to be most attractive to our learners, what you would like to be able to consider is, well, what makes sense for the population and the group of people that I would like to contain or to attract and to have in my program? And so what I can tell you in terms of the summary is that what you're looking at to get those convenience learners is they're looking at cost. They're not so much looking at the mode. They're not so much looking at the connections to employers and to additional programs. They're important, but less so than these other types of features. If you're looking for the knowledge seekers, you know, those people who are about 22% of the population, they want the connection. They want the cost to be lower, but they're not so concerned about the amount of workload or the amount of commitment. And the reputation for almost all of them is extremely important. Cost and reputation really matter to these people in order to be able to get those shares of preference of these particular groups. That's what they are looking for. And so, you know, considering this particular study and what are the, you know, the limitations, I did only look at these particular 7 attributes. It is an experimental quantitative study. I didn't have that ability to actually ask people and really dig down in an interview type of a format. And I also, you know, limited myself to the type of micro-credentials that are offered by post-secondary institutions. But at this point, what are the actual, you know, conclusions and generalities that we can make about what are the adult learner preferences? So these are, you know, the main takeaways. Number 1, the cost of a micro-credential program matters, and it matters a lot in terms of what that end sticker price is going to be that's coming out of your adult learner's pocket. The second most important is reputation, and that is reputation based on your standing within the community. And it could be institution-wide, it could be program-wide, it could be course-based, but that reputation is really something that the adult learners are looking for, and is something that you would need to be able to highlight to attract more learners from, say, a storefront degree milieu. Connections to potential employers are preferred. So doing the work to make connections with industry, to make connections with particular businesses, to make connections with organizations, to recognize your micro-credentials is going to give you a huge benefit in terms of attracting learners to your particular program. Within an institution, because I work at a university, it is easy to offer potentially advanced placement or advanced standing in a graduate program or a secondary qualification. While that is better than doing nothing, it's not what these adult learners are necessarily gravitating towards. What they are hoping to get out of this program is that connection with a workplace benefit, and that is to have that understanding that it is going to be recognized by an employer, that it's going to be recognized by an industry, that it's going to have that type of future employment benefit. A lot of people do prefer online learning, but it's not universal. Therefore, in terms of designing your micro-credentials, what you're going to want to do is not just limit yourself to offering an online program. Adult learners would have a preference for less than 50 hours if that works for the content. And again, because what I was looking at in this study was trade-offs as well as making bundles of programs together. If you can package a program that in which you have an excellent reputation, that you have those connections to employers, it is completely possible to then gain a higher share of preference among the learners with higher program costs, because they are willing to pay for those particular levels, those particular attributes, because those are more important when they all come together. So as you move forward and go forward into your own programs, your own planning, what I highly recommend is that you do create different types of programs to suit various preference groups by emphasizing your own program strengths that as they exist today and as they are developed into the future, and leverage your reputational standing. Do raise awareness of existing forms of reimbursement, and whether that is from an employer or even the Canadian Training Credit, which is available to all Canadian taxpayers. Certainly as post-secondary institutions, this is available to your micro-credential programs as a recognized institution. People, when they do their taxes, can apply for this. It's relatively simple. And also understand that online learning is not universally preferred. And so if online learning or blended learning does not necessarily suit the content that you are wanting to have a micro-credential for, don't be afraid to potentially offer that as an in-person program or a blended program if that suits. Seek employer and industry partnerships and connections. The more that these particular micro-credentials are recognized and understood by industry is going to be extremely important. It is one huge driver of what people are looking for when they're going to say, yes, this is something that I prefer. Yes, I would actually consider enrolling it, is that recognition piece by entities outside of your own university or college. Keep micro-credentials programs short. Under 100 real hours would be ideal. Not credit hours. I know certainly there's different ways of telling time and credit hours within institutions, but for general folks, you can package this as less than 100 real hours of their time, that's going to be appealing to them. And that a target demographic for micro-credentials are those who are between 35 years of age and 44 years of age. Those were predominantly those folks who were within that knowledge seeker as well as the convenience learner category. The group that is really wanting to have that additional knowledge, to gain those additional skills, to further their qualifications and to build their resumes with a micro-credential, that's sort of that age group that you're looking for. And so, in closing, first of all, I really want to thank you very much for your time. I am really excited about being able to contribute in future to additional research in this particular field, because one of the things that this really showcased for me was how much we need to have some quantitative data on micro-credential programs, but also that there's still very much that needs to be understood and learned about these in terms of content and topic preference, what does quality actually mean to our learners, and what kind of standards and work can we do in that particular time. So I'm going to end it here, so we have some time for questions, and I think someone from eCampus Ontario is going to help moderate questions as they maybe come into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand and ask that online.
Thanks so much, Lauren. Thanks for such a fantastic research and insight-filled presentation. I see a lot of positive feedback from our chat and Q&A box. Quite a few questions about the meaning of online and the difference between something that is maybe perhaps online self-paced versus online instructor-led. Does that play a role in learners' preferences? Were you able to discover that from your research, or what might you hypothesize?
Sure. So that idea of having a flexible program was that self-paced type of a learning. And so that's that idea of where you have essentially unlimited access to a particular course material, and you can go through it at your own stage. And that could be usually done online. The idea of having a set amount of time where maybe there was different check-in points or assignments, that was that sort of more of an idea of having a fixed type of a schedule.
Awesome. In terms of topical preferences, maybe this is beyond the scope of your presentation, but have you come across any research, or did you encounter in your own work, how might topic kind of influence some of those 7 key attributes that you explored?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I did, as part of my questionnaire, socio-demographic questionnaire at the end, ask people, when you were thinking about what is the most preferred micro-credential for you, what topic were you thinking of? And the number one was IT, so a technology type of a micro-credential. Number two was healthcare. So somebody within that nursing, medical type of field. And number three was other. And so while I would absolutely like to dig into what are the topics and the content type of preferences, my data that I was able to collect with the instrument that I had did not really lend itself to breaking that in. I want to look at that next. I think it was absolutely useful to be able to at least sort of get that understanding of, okay, technology is good, healthcare is good. But that other was really, really interesting to me. And healthcare and technology are huge fields in and of themselves. And so I think that, whether it's myself or future researchers who are looking at this, there's a lot there that you can take a look at. And I highly encourage future investigative work into that area.
Awesome. Thank you, Lauren. Did your research encounter any information about the average actual cost in Canada, or maybe the average length, or any of those program attributes across the board on a national scale? What is out there in the market right now?
Yeah, and that very much depends on the province. And so, for example, within British Columbia, their frameworks limit micro-credentials to 280 hours. Whereas in Ontario, there's different types of guidelines, and each institution has made different types of boxes in which what they will call a micro-credential versus a certificate versus a degree or a diploma. There is not, because there's no national database, I was unable to make any kind of a conclusion. So if somebody would like to do that work of putting all micro-credentials together and then doing some different types of analyses to find those averages or to find what that looks like, I think that is useful to do. The clearinghouse that Ontario has, where all of the different micro-credentials are essentially listed, is a good starting point. But not every province has that. Ontario is well ahead of Alberta, of British Columbia, Saskatchewan, in having that type of a clearinghouse in which that data can be gleaned. On average, there has been some research that I think some folks from OCAD had done, that in general, a micro-credential at more of a postgraduate level does tend to be longer than one that is at a college type of a level, or just past post-secondary. But again, there's no conclusions from this particular research that I can say at a national level.
Awesome, thank you. Did you encounter anything that might make micro-credentials easier for neurodivergent learners in particular?
That was not particular focus of the study. I can sort of hypothesize and just, from my own gut feeling, but not necessarily based on research. I would say that the fact that micro-credentials are shorter, more focused topics is one thing that would absolutely appeal to a person with neurological differences and neurodiverse, and whatever that may be. I think the fact that we are able to offer these types of learnings is stackable, as well as ones that people can put together to suit their particular interest is particularly appealing to some people with neurological differences and divergence. I also think that the ability for people to potentially take a look at gaining micro-credentials from a variety of institutions that best suits them at that particular point in time can also be a benefit as well. So while I don't have data to back that up, I do think that this particular format of learning could be appealing to that particular population.
Great, thank you. Did your research cover the 18 to 22 age group, which is typically the market for right out of high school post-secondary education?
I did not. I explicitly excluded folks who were less than 20, who are 23 or younger, because I felt that within that particular study that they might already be in school, pursuing a undergraduate degree, pursuing an apprenticeship program or a diploma. I was really hoping to sort of capture people who were in that adult education type of a market, that less non-traditional post-secondary learner, but those that are still very interesting to that continuing education side. I think people who are in that 18 to 22 to 24 years of age have particular needs and differences that make them a distinct population of interest, because perhaps they are trying to combine this with their first credential, their first degree. And so absolutely, somebody who would like to sort of take the reins from this and move forward with that group, it would be very interesting to see what the differences may be.
Absolutely. And one final question here, and perhaps a great one to end on. How can people follow you for your future work, updates, access to this paper, for instance? Where can they go from here?
Absolutely. So I only just defended and submitted in the fall. And so, I'm at that sort of just coming out of recovery mode from finishing my doctoral work. That being said, there is a publication that will be forthcoming. Please absolutely read it. I'm happy to sort of publicize this. At this point, my dissertation in its all, tome form of 300 plus pages is available on ProQuest. I mean, I can certainly, recommend to look at that. But yes, I am on LinkedIn. I did have my email address on my slides. I will be sharing them through this particular forum afterwards. And I hope to continue research in this space because I think it's extremely interesting and there's lots to be able to look at. And, thank you very much, Michael and eCampus Ontario, for being able to present today and to share my research.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And just in our final 2 minutes here, just wanted to give a special thanks to our sponsors who make this event possible: the Government of Ontario, CCI Learning, the Indigenous Institutes Consortium, the Ontario Council on Articulation and Transfer, Lightcast, and Pressbooks. We will be continuing the conversation this afternoon, and we invite you to join at 2 p.m. Eastern for our next pre-conference webinar, Bridging to Employment, Using Micro-Credentials to Address Skills Gaps and Support Workforce Integration for Internationally Educated Nurses in Canada. If you'd like to register, please visit our website, which we shared in the chat earlier, and I'll be happy to drop that in there again in a moment. Our conversation will continue in 2 weeks' time at the Toronto Reference Library. Over 2 full and exciting days, we'll explore how micro-credentials and upskilling programs are rapidly addressing current skill shortages and anticipating future needs in sectors critical to Ontario's economic and social prosperity. From advanced manufacturing to healthcare and electric vehicles, the Micro-Credential Forum will highlight how post-secondary institutions, industry partners, and eCampus Ontario are working together to equip learners and businesses with the tools and talent they need to thrive. This event schedule includes more than 25 presentations and workshops, catered lunch socials, and a special networking reception. Join us on February 27th and 28th as we drive innovation in the higher education sector, bridge skill gaps, and build futures. We hope to see you there, and bye for now.